got a handout there, and when you get down through it, you're going to notice that there's one slide that got repeated. I'm not sure how I missed that, but I discovered it as I was going through this morning. I had one slide repeated, but those were printed last week. So we're studying grace in the Pentateuch, or reading another way to look at it. Wayne wants me to put on my mic here, I'm sure. There we go. Grace in the Pentateuch, or reading Moses and seeing Jesus. And I'm having a great time looking at all these words and how things are repeated, and how God has put together his word. Remember, this is the plenary. That means all of it. Inspired, verbally inspired. Not only all of it, but every word of it is inspired. Every word is important. And as we go through it and read it, it's very interesting as we analyze some of the sentences and phrases and so on, especially as our Hebrew-speaking authors of the book we're using as our sort of our study here. Obviously, they understand Hebrew a little better than we do, and they get the nuances of it. So we're connecting the dots and finding in the Old Testament, we're finding Jesus. Now, we're still doing all the preliminary stuff to show us that Jesus is there. We haven't really got to the end to put it all together. We're still connecting the dots. So for those of you that haven't been in this class, the Torah, or the Pentateuch, anticipates law-breaking. It's not a book that tells us that we have to keep the law, although we do have to keep the law, or we're supposed to keep the law, but that won't get us to heaven. And we find that the failure of faith leads to death, and we find that the remedy is the Messiah. And then we found out there was a mandate given to Adam back in the garden, and we find that Adam was connected to Israel directly. Obviously, he was an ancestor of Israel, but there were some other connections there. And now we're in a chapter, we keep bringing this slide up every week. The law cannot be the Torah's goal, but then what or who? And of course, it's the Messiah. And we're in the down in the section where we're talking about Noah. So I'm going to skip through a bunch of slides here. And I've been asked to finish a little bit early, and that's probably not a problem today because I've got, I think, a fairly short lesson, so it's going to work out quite well. We looked at whether the serpent was a garden variety snake, and some of these things that we're looking at, as I've said in the class to those of you that aren't normally here, I'm not saying anything that's particularly new to you, at least it shouldn't be. But there may be some nuances of it that are new and ways of looking at it that you haven't thought about, but there shouldn't be any new truth here, because the old saying is, if it's true, it's not new, and if it's new, it's not true. So you say, well, I know all that stuff. Yeah, okay, good. That's wonderful. If you know all that stuff, that's wonderful. I'm glad you do. But I know all this stuff too, but as I've been studying, I've learned a lot, so I'm hoping that you'll learn a little bit too. So, we looked at whether in Genesis 3:15, which is our basic text really for the whole study, and it's certainly our basis for this particular study in this chapter, but it's the basis of our whole study because, and if you haven't memorized this verse, or at least be very familiar with Genesis 3:14 and 15, you need to be, because it's the Pastor Baldwin referred to this. He invented a new word the other night, but he referred to this passage. What's Genesis 3:15 called? What's the big fancy word for it? Some of you younger people there that you're all great students and so on, know all these words. You know what they are, what it is? Starts with P. The proto. Proto-evangelium. It's a prototype. We talk about a prototype. Sometimes when we're building things, we build a prototype. Say, is it going to work? We have to do it because we have to find out if it's going to work, if it's going to fit or whatever. Well, God didn't need to do that to find out if it was going to fit because he already knew. It was his plan. But this has got all the rest of the Bible tied up in it, because this book is what? This is a book of his story. It's a book of history. His story. History is his story. The story of God, the story of history, the story of Christ. And Genesis 3:15 says, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. And we looked at who this seed was, and it's not Israel. The Jewish rabbis would say that the seed is Israel. Well, yes, it is in the broad sense, but it's not Israel specifically. It's a very specific person. Has Israel conquered Satan? Anybody see any signs that Israel has conquered Satan? Satan's still around in the world? Do you think he is a little bit active maybe in the world today? I think so. By the way, there are those that believe that we're in the millennium right now. You know that? I really don't quite understand their psychology or philosophy or mentality even, for anybody that thinks that we're in the millennium. But there are people in this world today that believe that we're now in the millennium, that the church has conquered everything and everything is going to get better and better. There are people that still believe that. It used to be a very prominent teaching way back in the 20s and so on. After the First World War, there was not going to be any more war, and the church was going to take over from everything, and everything was just going to be beautiful, and we're now in the millennium. Well, then the Second World War came along, and we've just been wars ever since. But there are still people that believe that. There's some people believe the Earth's flat too. So there are all kinds of crazies in the world. So the seed of the woman is a person. We saw that, and we saw that the serpent's seed is those who will curse Abraham's seed. Anybody who curses Abraham's seed is the serpent's seed, is Satan's seed. And we're down now into the seed. One of the seeds of the woman was this man that we know as Noah, and that's where we're finishing up today here. There we go. So, the story of Noah. Just a review for those of you that haven't been in this class. We saw that Adam was the first king. He was given a dominion. All the things that he was told to do are the things that kings are supposed to do. He's supposed to have dominion. Who has dominion? Who has rule in this world? Well, it's the king. We use the word king in quotes because we don't, in this country, we don't have a king directly, although we do have a king. Somebody challenged me on that, but according to the documents of our country, we have a king. That doesn't mean we necessarily like him, and there's lots of places where there's a king. By the way, we need to pray for the Christians in Syria. Last Sunday, we found out that the very nasty president of Syria fled the country. But one thing that he did do that was good is he protected the Christians. And I'm saying Christians in quotes because there's all flavors of Christians and not all of them are saved Christians, but he protected the Christians from the radicals. And that protection is now gone. So we need to pray for the Christians because there are those that are probably coming into power that like to get rid of anybody other than their own religion and so on. So that's a kind of a sad thing. Although he was ruthless and he was not a good person, and also he, for some reason or other, he protected the Christians. It was the same thing in Iraq. Before Saddam fell, Christians had basically freedom to practice religion. They didn't really have freedom of religion, but they had freedom to practice religion, as long as they minded their own business and didn't get into politics. And then after he fell, things have been not very good for them there. So If you know any Syrian Christians, or have ever heard tell of them, you better we better be praying for them. Anyway, Satan is around. Adam was a king, and he was also a priest. And so then we come to Noah, and Noah follows on from Adam. And the story of Noah is very similar to the story of Adam. Noah, the word Noah means rest. So our authors refer to him as Mr. Rest. Mr. Rest. That's what Noah means, rest. So he's Mr. Rest. So if you're reading through the Bible and you come to the story of the ark, you can just refer to Mr. Rest. Mr. Rest, and then there was Ham Rest and Shem Rest and Japheth Rest, right? And then after that, there was all the rest of them. Hey, I just made that one up. Anyway, Mr. Rest. How is he going to bring rest to creation? Well, let's see. We'll get there. And we have seen in an earlier chapter, there's a saying in the Jewish world that the deeds of the father are a sign for the sons. It's a common saying, the deeds of the father are a sign for the sons. And we've looked at this and we see this happens here, and then in the sons or the grandsons or the great-grandsons or the 25th great-grandsons, we see the same thing happening again. We see how we get the same story repeated, especially in the Pentateuch, in the first 5 books of the Bible. Can you think of some stories that are repeated? Different people, it's the same story? These aren't made-up stories. These are real stories. These really happened, but it's the same story. Can you think of a couple? I'm just trying to get everybody on the same page here. Anybody think of there's a couple of big stories that repeat. Somebody did something or other, and then a few years later somebody else did almost exactly the same things. The same story, just with different players. Yeah? Yeah. And Isaac and Rebekah did the same thing, didn't they? Yeah? Yeah, that's one. And there's some others. But that's what this is referring to. When something happens, it's likely to happen again. By the way, is that still true in our lives? Do our kids do some things that we do? And do we do some things that our parents did or our grandparents did? Do we have some of the same traits and characteristics? Now, some of us don't want to admit that, because sometimes we have traits in our ancestors that weren't necessarily real positive, and sometimes they come out in us, don't they? I see some heads shaking, yeah. Sometimes the negative characteristics of some of our forebears come out in us. Well, at least they do in me. I don't know about you. Maybe they don't in you, but maybe you don't have any bad characteristics in any of your forebears. I don't know. I have a few. And I know some of your forebears, and I know some of them, they weren't perfect either. And guess what? I know most of you, and I know that you're not perfect either. I'm not saying that in a mean way. I just know that's the truth. Because why? Because we're all sinners, right? But this is a thing here. So, the parallels between Noah and Adam. We looked at this last week, but we'll bring it up to date. We don't have a lot of material to cover today, so we'll bring this up to date. What did God do to Adam? He brought the animals to them to name. And then what did he do to Noah? Did Noah have to go out and send out a posse to bring the animals to the ark? No. They came. We sing that little song, the animals came 2 by 2 or something or other. I can't remember how it goes. Some of you know that song, the kids' song. Can anybody sing that one? Don't bother. But God did the same thing. And then God brought Noah and his children safely through judgment. And he got a slightly revised form of the creation mandate. What was the creation mandate? What did God tell Adam to do before the fall? What did he tell him to do? It was a 4-letter word. The word is not in there, but it's a 4-letter word that starts with W and ends in K. What was Adam supposed to do? Work, right? Adam was supposed to work. Work is not a result of sin. Work is something God wants us to do. and it's a good thing. He was told to look after the planet. And now Noah gets the same thing. We saw this last week. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Does that sound like what he told Adam? We're going to look at that verse in a minute. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the field and upon every bird of the heavens and upon everything that creeps upon the ground and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Who has the responsibility and the use of and whatever of the birds and fish and animals and so on? Mankind does. They're for us. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. When we lived in Singapore, the Chinese had a saying on there, if it moves with its back to the sun, it's edible. It doesn't matter what it is, if it moves with its back to the sun, it's edible. I'm not sure what moves without its back to the sun, but anyway, there must be some things. Maybe that's a sloth, because they travel upside down. They don't have their back to the sun. I don't know. That just occurred to me. As I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. You shall not eat the flesh with its life, that is the blood. This is not, I usually shift over to the King James, and I didn't, I copied this in, didn't copy it over. But anyway, the wording's good. And God blessed them. Adam, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds and the heavens and so on. And I've given every green plant, and so on. What was the difference between what God told Noah and what God told Adam? There's one difference, basically, well, two differences here. Pardon me? Okay, the animals had fear, but what were the dietary changes? Pardon me? Adam didn't eat animals, but Noah did, right? And what was the other thing? What was the restriction? God gave a restriction to Adam, and what was that? One restriction he gave to Adam. They could eat any plants and so on except fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And to Noah, what was the restriction there? There's only one restriction he gave. No blood. And it seems that still continues. It's mentioned in Acts. So, Noah, like his father Adam, he was blessed. What were the three things that God gave Adam that are going to keep getting repeated? God gave him three things. He gave him a blessing, he gave him seed, and he gave him land. Does that get repeated? Where does that get repeated? Well, we just saw it repeated with Noah, didn't we? He gave him blessing, seed, had descendants, and he was supposed to look after things. And where was that given in a big way? Again, that's not in our study today, but where was that given a big thing again? Who had blessing, seed, and land? Abraham had blessing, seed, and land, right? And of course that passed on. So we're seeing the deeds of the fathers are repeated in the children. These things keep getting done. Dietary provisions, dietary restrictions, and what happened to Adam? Adam was created perfect, and what did he do? He fell, he sinned. What about Noah? He got saved through the flood, and then what happened? He kind of messed up a little bit, didn't he? Okay? So that's where we are. The planting of a garden and a vineyard. God planted a God planted a garden for Adam, and Adam was supposed to look after it. What did Noah do? What does it tell us? We can look at the verse. Let's go to Genesis chapter 9. And Noah began to be Alex Henderson. He began to be a husbandman. He began to be a farmer. That's what that word means. He was a farmer. And he planted a vineyard. I don't think Alex has a vineyard, but he plants other things. And he planted a vineyard. And what do you get out of a vineyard? You get grape juice. What happens if you let grape juice sit around for a while? It ferments. And if you let it ferment too much, what happens to it? It becomes alcoholic, and if you drink it, what happens to you? Now, we don't know if Adam knew what he was doing or not. We don't know, because before the flood, there was no fermentation. As far as we know, there was no fermentation before the flood. There was a different climate and so on, and there was probably no fermentation. So Adam may or may not have known that this was going to get him drunk, or he may have. The Bible doesn't say. It just said he drank of the wine and was drunken. And what happens when people get drunk? They do strange things. And Adam did some strange things. Sorry, Noah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm just like the preachers that get up here and talk about Enoch when they're supposed to be talking about Elijah or something or other. I've never known any preachers to do that in this pulpit, though. It's amazing what happens to you when you get up here. Your brain just sort of goes wonky. Hey, Pastor? You can say all kinds of strange things. Thank you for correcting me there. I don't mind a bit. So, did Adam take of the fruit in the garden? Yeah, he ate some stuff, and then Eve said, well, we should try this tree over here. And Adam said, yeah, that's a great idea. No, not really. Eve was deceived, and Adam did what? He did it on purpose, didn't he? Some commentators say he did it because he loved his wife and he didn't want her to be in sin and him not to be. I don't know. But anyway, he did it. Romans chapter 5 says, as by what? One man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all, and literally all, have been sinning. We not just have sinned once, we have been sinning. So, and they had a shameful nakedness. What about Adam and Eve? What happened after they ate of the fruit of the tree? They saw that they were naked and were ashamed, and they took some fig leaves and sewed them together and covered themselves up. And what did God do? God said, that's not good enough. He came down and he killed an animal, and he made coats for them, shed blood. First death that we know of was when God slew some animals and made coats for Adam and Eve. It says, by man came death, so there couldn't have been death before that. And what happened with Noah? Well, he had shameful nakedness. And then somebody knew there was something shameful. And what happened? They covered it up. Remember, Ham went in and he laughed about it. And the other two brothers went in and they took a coat and covered up their father, as Ham should have done. And of course, there was a curse that came out of that. So, similarities. This story over here gets repeated over here. Different players, different circumstances, but basically the same story. And we're going to see it again and again. So, this is the slide that got repeated here. Now, Noah's fall, what does Genesis 3:15 say? We've looked at this, but let's go back to it. It's key. I will put enmity between thee, the serpent, and the woman, between thy seed and what does it say? Whose seed? Her seed. Not Adam's seed, her seed. Very specific. It's the woman's seed, the seed of the woman, not the seed of the man. Who was the seed of a woman, not the seed of a man? The Lord Jesus Christ was the seed of a woman, but he wasn't the seed of a man. So here's the first prediction of the Messiah. Between thy seed and her seed. Her seed, shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. We looked at that. So we know Adam is not the one. He's a seed of the woman, but he's not the seed of the woman. But he's a seed of the woman. His victory is partial. The war between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent will continue. And who are they going to fight for? Who is Israel going to fight for quite a while? Who did Israel have problems with? The Canaanites. Who had the curse put on them? Let's go back to Genesis chapter 9. It says, Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son, who was his younger son? Ham, had done unto him. But he doesn't say, cursed be Ham. Who does he say? Cursed be Canaan. Who were the Canaanites? What do we know about the Canaanites? They were the people that lived in the promised land where Israel was supposed to go, where Adam's descendants were supposed to go. And what did God tell Adam was going to happen to his descendants until something happened? This is key. This is key to what's going on in the world today even. What did God tell Abraham was going to happen? I think I said Adam, but what did God tell Abraham was going to happen to his descendants until something else happened? He said they were going to go down into another land, and we know it was Egypt, for 400 years until what? The iniquity of the Amorites was full. And the Amorites were part of these Canaanites. Okay? Was it an accident that Israel went down into Egypt? No. God told Abram it was going to happen. And they did. Until these were the Canaanites. This conflict went on, and then they come back up here, and what did God do to the Canaanites? It's just so interesting how God does all this stuff, and God does stuff for us, and what do we do? Just like the children of Israel, what did God tell them to do, and what he was going to do for them in the land of the Canaanites? What did he say he would do? He was very specific. He said, you go in, and I'm not going to do something, but I am going to do something. What did he say? This is all relates to this curse right here. He said, I'm not going to drive them all out on the first day, but I am going to drive them out. But you've got to do this. Why didn't he drive them all out on the first day type of thing? Well, the land would have been left empty, and they weren't prepared to cover the whole land and look after the whole land. So he left these people in there to cultivate the land and make crops and keep the land going good and have vineyards and orchards and all these things. But he says, I'm going to drive them out. But you've got to go in and do the things you're supposed to do. And how'd that work out? Not very well. They kind of blew that, and what did God say? Okay, well, I'm not going to drive the rest of the people out. I'm going to let them be here to be a thorn in your flesh. Does that remind you of anybody you know? Do we have complete victory over the flesh and over sin in our lives? And if we don't, why don't we? Whose fault is that? It's not God's. What does 1 John say? If any man say he have no sin, he's a liar. And if any man sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. And if we do what? If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And when we're not victorious over sin, John says we'll sin, but other passages in there says we don't have to. We don't have to sin, but we will. But we will. So, this is very much related to our story here. Cursed be Canaan. Cursed the Canaanites, they're going to have to fight with the Canaanites. So, in what sense did Noah bring rest from the curse? Well, God looked down from heaven and he saw that the way of man was only what? Evil continually. Interesting. Remember we said the words are all inspired. They weren't just evil. They were evil continually. Has that changed? Mankind still evil continually? Yeah. Lots of evil in the world. And God looked down and he said, I'm going to destroy except for these 8 people. So how did he bring rest from the curse? By building an ark? Well, partially. By surviving the flood? Partially. No, that was not the big thing that Noah did. Noah's greatest achievement was fulfilling his priestly role, because what did he do after he got off the ark? Let's go back. He built an altar and offered a sacrifice. Where's our verses here? Verse 20, Genesis chapter 8, verse 20. And Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Was God surprised that the people sinned? No. Was God surprised that there was sin after the flood? No. He said, imagination of man's heart is only evil from his youth. Neither will again I smite any more every living thing as I have done. While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease, until he creates the new heavens and the new earth. Right? And God blessed Noah and his sons, and said unto them, and be fruitful. We read those verses. So what Noah did here was he offered a sacrifice. He brought the news of salvation to his sons and grandsons and so on. We don't know all that happened. We're told when some of these were born, some were born before the flood, and some were born after the flood. And, well, obviously there weren't any grandchildren before the flood, because there was only 8 people in the ark. But there could have been grandchildren by the time they got off the ark. We don't know that. Possible. They were on there for a year. Anyway, he offered a sacrifice. And then we have Noah's name. Noah means rest. And all through these passages, remember, Hebrew poetry works on relationships between words. It's not rhyming. Like we look at poetry and we say it has to rhyme, or we have blank verse, and sometimes modern poetry, look at it and say, well, I don't think that's a poem. It's what do they call it? They write these things out, these paragraphs out, and it's sort of poetic, but it's not really a poem. What do they call that? Narrative poetry or something? Not narrative poetry. It's anyway, it doesn't matter. Some of you know. You must study that in school. No, you probably don't. I don't think anybody studies anything in school anymore, do they? If they go to public school, they don't study anything. Don't learn much. Certainly don't learn any math and science. They learn all about all kinds of junk. But I remember my colleague at the community college 30-some years ago. Somebody asked him how his class was, and they were all guys, and he said they're a great bunch of guys. The only problem is they can't read, they can't write, they can't do math. And that was 30-some years ago. And it hasn't got any better since. Anyway, Noah, Mr. Rest. And this Mr. Rest word gets used all through these passages in different forms. Okay? The same basic word gets used. Noah will bring comfort in Genesis 5:29. And he called his name Noah, saying, this same shall, what's it going to do? His father named him Lamech. He shall his comfort. Same word. Basically the same word, nekam. I don't know, I'm not a Hebrew pronouncer, but he said he's going to comfort us. And then God looks down in Genesis 6:6-8, and it says, and it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. Guess what that word, it repented the Lord, or God regretted it. It grieved him at his heart, and we got the word Nahum. It's sort of the opposite of comfort. God was grieved. He was not comforted. But it's the same basic word. And then Noah finds favor. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Chen, which is, our authors tell us it's Noah spelled backwards. Interesting, isn't it? It doesn't look like Noah spelled backwards, but because we don't use Hebrew characters. But that's what they tell us. And the ark in chapter 8 and verse 4, and I've got about 2 minutes left here, said it rested. Same word, same basic word, it rested. Mr. Rest, his ark rested. And the dove doesn't find a resting place. Same word. So, what's the climax? Noah builds an altar. He offers sacrifices. The aroma is pleasing to the Lord. And this word pleasing in 8:21, we looked at that. It said it was pleasing to the Lord. Guess what? Same basic word. So, Noah does give rest. Noah brings some rest because he pleased the Lord. So it was the offering. It wasn't surviving on the ark. It wasn't taking the animals into the ark. It wasn't getting off the ark. It wasn't planting a vineyard. It was Noah offering a sacrifice that pleased the Lord. So that was where the rest came from. So there's one beyond Noah, a seed of the woman, and he's going to reign as the king, and he is the new Adam. And everything stems from the old Adam. In fact, Jesus Christ is called the second Adam, right? He's called the second Adam. So it all goes back to Adam, and then we see this Adam story gets repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated. And it's still being repeated. Are we given blessings? Do we fail? Yeah, well, we're just some Adam's children, aren't we? So let's rejoice in the fact that there was a Messiah that came, and we have the time to celebrate, and we're going to have the children come up and practice celebrating for the morning service right now. So you're dismissed. I almost gave you 5 minutes. I gave you 4.